All right, I am reverting to an earlier approach to recording here. And what I'm going to do is talk about Picture This, How Pictures Work by Molly Bang. And in order to make it pretty simple, I'm just going to hold up the picture that I'm talking about. So this is the first page of the book. And basically, Molly is retelling the story of Little Red Riding Hood. So she's got this red triangle. And the question is, do you feel anything about this shape? Very quickly, the single red triangle is replaced by two red triangles. And so you could have the idea that the smaller one is a child of the larger one. But the larger one doesn't seem very cuddly. So on the bottom picture, she's rounded the corners, and it says, how can I keep her large but give Little Red Riding Hood prominence in the picture? And so in this one, we've got Little Red Riding Hood is still the pointed triangle, and Mom is a little more cuddly because she's got rounded corners. She goes on then to change the color of Mom. And so one of the things that she mentions is the impact that colors have. And when we talked a couple weeks ago about color theory, there are some universals of color. Red symbolizes blood, it symbolizes danger. But a lot of color connections aren't really universal, and they will differ with different cultures. But on this one, this is on page 3, it has shown some of the ways that shapes and colors affect us emotionally. So again, this is not just ideas that Molly Bang has, even though she is an award-winning graphic artist and author of children's books. The ideas that she's representing here are largely those that were originally postulated by Rudolf Arnheim in this Art and Visual Perception, the psychology of the creative eye, and these really come from Gestalt psychology. So we've got the original Gestalt psychology, we got Rudolf Arnheim's application of Gestalt psychology to the analysis of visual art, and then we have Molly Bang, sort of student of Arnheim. Arnheim actually writes the dedication in her book. So these aren't just the ideas of a gifted graphic artist, these are backed up by Gestalt psychology. So now what we have is we've got some trees, but as she said, the trees on the top, they're too much like the shape of Little Red Riding Hood. So she complicates them a little bit with the triangles and makes them more tree-like. Now, what we've done at the top one, she has this sense of depth by just taking these tree trunks and making some of them smaller and higher up in the picture plane. We create a sense of distance. And down at the bottom now we have Little Red Riding Hood in the presence of these tree trunks. And so here's Little Red Riding Hood at a certain size, and then if we make her smaller, she's even more, the environment is more threatening because of the size of her relative to the size of the other objects. And then in this one, she's got Little Red Riding Hood somewhat up the picture plane, and it says, but the picture didn't feel as scary as before. Why not? How can I make the trees feel more threatening? And then what she does is she has them not straight up and down, because in that situation they're stable. Now by having them leaning, they are unstable. Diagonal lines give a feeling of movement and tension to the picture. She introduces the wolf, and he's kind of scary because of all of his angular features. And then she changes the size of the wolf. I feel very differently when the wolf is made much smaller. So I think the larger wolf is scarier than the smaller wolf. And then the blunt-nosed wolf is not as scary as the pointed wolf. But then the blue, purple blue wolf is not as scary as the black wolf. So what she's trying to do is make the wolf scarier, and eventually the addition of teeth makes a big difference in how scary that wolf is. And then she does an eye, and the eye is sort of like bluish color, and wolves sometimes have blue eyes, but that's not so scary. So when she makes the eye red, it's now a much scarier wolf. What happens if the eye is made exactly the same color and shape as Little Red Riding Hood? So she does that here, and so now we've got an eye the same shape as Little Red Riding Hood, and it's not quite so scary. The picture feels very different, and yet all that has changed is the shape of the eye. what feature could I add to the wolf to make it more frightening? So she's returned to the diamond-shaped eye, and she wants to add a feature, and basically one of the things a wolf can do is eat you, so adding a big scary red tongue helps. Then, by making the background purple, she's making it darker. The image is now scarier because of the fact that at night we don't see as well as we do during the day. And then finally, she's got the scariest possible wolf because we've got the red eye, the red tongue, the teeth are now white, the trees are unstable and leaning over, and the teeth are sharp white teeth. So after that, basically each slide is a principle. So if you look at the slide and look at the writing in red underneath the slide, it's telling you the principles of picture composition. So these are not just her ideas, but these are ideas that Gestalt psychology says these are sort of, you can trust these, you can count on these. These are things that all people are going to feel the same way about these different visual effects. This one here points to when we first saw when we first saw Gestalt psychology, there's this idea of continuity, okay, in order to work backwards. So these triangles now, we follow them. They're going off in space. By creating this direction and getting smaller, they're making us follow them. We know now that they're moving. What increases the sense of movement even more in this picture? And it's the idea of multiple ones getting smaller as they go up the picture plane. Where she's placed on the picture plane matters. We've got some other things there. And so the next principles have to do with the picture as a world of its own. So in this one here, this is on page 22, she says, the center of the page is the most effective center of attention. It is the point of greatest attraction, which kind of makes sense. But now that is actually contradicting an idea that is found in photography, and it's going to be called sort of the rule of thirds. And so I will come back to that at a later time. But if you imagine that you take a rectangle and you divide it into 3 horizontal, 3 vertical, kind of like a tic-tac-toe grid, the intersection of those lines is supposedly the point of greatest power, interest, attraction in a photograph. So that says if you want to make a good photograph, you don't put what you want the people to look at in dead center, which would be in the middle of the middle square. You put the focus at the intersection of those rule of thirds. So it's possible that both could be right, but this notion here conflicts with a commonly accepted notion of how to make powerful photographs. Okay, and so then she's asking questions about what happens when the focus of attention shifts. We're back then to that centering idea, the one at the top. It says, when an object or whole centered in the middle of the page, it's difficult to move away from the center. So that could be true. That is not necessarily in conflict with the idea that if you want to make a great photograph, you don't put the subject dead center. It could still be the case that if you have a circle in the center of an image, it is difficult for the viewer to take their eye off that centered circle. And this is about associating with red with blood and fire. Curved shapes protect us. This is probably when we think of our first experiences might be with a mother who is curvy and protective, etc. The larger an object is in a picture, the stronger it feels. So this is a very strong triangle down there because it's very large with respect to the picture plane. This is a much smaller one. That's a weak one. This is an interesting phenomenon here. It says, the teacher asks you to separate all of these shapes into 2 groups of similar elements. How do you divide them? And I look at that and I say, well, I've got 4 triangles and I've got 3 circles. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to group the 4 triangles as a collection and the 3 circles as a collection. And now, what happens when you change the colors? It turns out that we associate the same or similar colors much more strongly than we associate the same or similar objects. So now when we would group these, we're going to group the 2 triangles and the circle as one group, and the 2 circles and the 2 triangles as another group, because we're choosing color first for our grouping. this bottom one is interesting because what it says is the overlapping object pierces or violates the space of the other, but this also joins them together into a single unit. So eventually when we start talking about logos, there's a lot of things that are going on in a logo where one part overlaps another. And so there are these principles of precedence. So here, two things are making that red triangle superior to the black triangle. One is the fact that warm colors come forward and dark colors recede, cool colors recede. So the fact that it's overlapping, it's closer to us, but also its vibrancy and its color brings it closer to us. So in that thing, those are not equal triangles. The red triangle is superior to the black triangle. We've got a couple other principles up here. Now they're getting a little esoteric. Down the bottom it says space implies time. We will encounter this again when we look at comic books and how time works in a comic book. Wide space can create tension between divided objects. So in this one, which is on page 33, there's apparently a lot of tension here because of the wide space between this thing that looks kind of like some kind of a being with eyes, and this thing over here looks like maybe like a small child or something. So there's tension there. But in the bottom one, that little sliver of space between the red vertical and the red horizontal is also creating tension. And then we have up here the final one. It says, this picture is extremely simple and extremely effective. So what we've got is a picture that, there's not even much that can be identified, and yet, according to Molly Bang and according to Rudolf Arnheim and according to Gestalt psychologists, there's a lot of things going on there that are going to affect you, the reader. So I'm going to wrap this one up and then post it to Canvas, and then not tonight, but probably tomorrow night, I'm going to talk about the one, the other reading for this week, not the one that you had the quiz on, but the other reading. And I'm going to pose a question to you about the degree to which the reading about the sort of avant-garde design, how does that compare to the plain vanilla, sort of, technical college school of design? So I'm going to ask you to give some thought to that, because there are tried and true principles that have been around for centuries or decades. But if you look at graphic art from the turn of the 20th century, it looks very different from the 50s, and that looks very different from the 20th century. And so one of the questions is, what are the forces that are changing what is considered good graphic communication? And is this just a matter of fashion, or does it have to do with the fact that more recent graphic artists and communicators have really looked into and understand the principles that attract your eye, keep your attention, move your emotions? So I'm going to close this off now and post it to our Canvas site, and then the next discussion of one of the readings will probably be available in Canvas tomorrow, Tuesday, I want to say February 13th. I think that's right. Talk to you later.